So I've done videos so far on a couple of the projects, the Robert Taylor Homes, Cabrini Green, and I've talked about some of the other projects in a bunch of videos. I was over by Lathrop Homes a few videos back talking about the Latin Kings over there. In this video, we're going to talk about one set of projects down in the wild hundreds known as Altgeld Gardens, and this is a group of projects that makes a lot more news today. Okay, Cabrini and Robert Taylor were making all the news back in the 90s, but Altgeld Gardens is making a lot of news in this day and age because there's a war down there between really like four different gangs. And the wild hundreds in general is generally like, it's not the most violent part of Chicago, but it's close to the top. You know, it's been bad for a while. So Altgeld Gardens, this is a neighborhood and a group of buildings that goes back about 80 years. Okay, now this is actually not in Roseland. It's in the neighborhood called Riverdale, which you guys may have heard in some other videos. Riverdale was where Little JoJo had stayed for a while. It's you can't let the names of some of these neighborhoods fool you, because Riverdale it's really not sweet. It's not sweet. It's not. I wouldn't put it on the same level as like Inglewood or Garfield Park, but it's not sweet by any means. Altgeld Gardens were built in the 40s, like in the mid 40s. Okay, and this was really particularly being built for Black people and specifically for Black war veterans. Now that makes it different from Cabrini Green, which was actually built and initially housed Italians, and a lot of the housing developments on the north side and stuff, and even some of the ones on the south side were initially built for European immigrants. This was built for African Americans specifically, man, and returning World War II veterans were who this was supposed to house. So Riverdale was kind of like an out of the way, unused piece of property. Okay, I mean that whole like section of the city. At the time, it was white. Okay, like most of the neighborhoods in Chicago back then were white, but there was only about between 1,000 and 2,000 people there. It wasn't like a large community, so displacing them was not going to be that big of a deal as far as logistics was concerned. These projects were named after a politician, a guy named John Peter Altgeld. They were not the kinds of structures that you saw with Cabrini and Robert Taylor, those big high-rise buildings that really stood out and you could see from a distance. These are like low-rise row houses, like complexes with only 2 stories. So the number of units total in Altgeld Gardens, 1,498. That was how many were initially built. Now, today, there may have been some additional ones built that I don't know about, but initially, back in the 40s, there was 1,498 units. Now, at this time, guys, with all these Black veterans returning from World War II to Chicago, there was a shortage of housing for Black people, okay? And, the white residents, they wanted to keep their neighborhoods, and, everybody else that was there, they wanted to keep their neighborhoods, and they didn't want their neighborhoods to change, but they had to put the Black residents somewhere. So, Riverdale, it was at the far end of the city. So Riverdale, turned out to be the place that they decided on. And there was a lot of pushback, though, from the white residents. They were protesting, okay, because in Roseland, Burnside, Pullman, there was this housing conflict going on. And the whites eventually, though, did lose those neighborhoods, okay, because you can go down there and see today, there's like not that many whites down there. Hardly any, really. But the projects were the solution that the city had to the housing crisis for the Black community. So there were jobs for them there, though. And these were jobs that since guys have, a lot of the jobs, the industrial jobs that used to be in Chicago have either been phased out or have been outsourced overseas. But these industrial jobs used to be here, and they were employing the Black men that were in that community in the projects. So the unemployment thing was not as much of a problem as it is today, because these jobs were not jobs that you needed like a specialized skill for. They were easy jobs that anybody could do and just learn on the job as long as you were able-bodied. So in 1954, the Chicago Housing Authority built a group of projects called the Philip Murray Homes. So this was about 500 row houses that were 2 stories, okay, and they were named after a guy who was a member of the labor movement. And about 40% at that time of Riverdale's population lived in those projects. So everything was pretty good for the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Okay, so for about 30 years, everything was going pretty smooth. However, in the 1970s, gangs started to come into the area. Now, these gangs specifically, guys, they were the VLs, Vice Lords, the Stones, okay, at that time, it was actually, they were going by El Rukins, the Black Disciples, and then a gang which you don't really see today anymore, which is the Black Gangster Disciples, which has kind of been like phased out. There may still be some old school members of them hanging around somewhere, but I've never met a Black Gangster Disciple in my life. So today it's BDs and GDs. Black Gangster Disciples, though, back then was still a thing. So, anyways, they came into the projects, and this was a time when the dope game was really taking off in the streets, okay, like in the 70s. So they started to sell dope in the projects. Crime started to go up. And this was occurring simultaneously with what I was just talking about with the factory jobs leaving. Okay, factories were closing down. A lot of those jobs were done by machine, going overseas to be done by people in third world countries and sweatshops, things like that. Okay, the labor was cheaper in other countries. Companies got to make their bottom line. They got to, maximize profits and minimize labor costs. Labor costs are cheaper elsewhere, cheaper to, ship the stuff over here because the shipping doesn't, offset the loss that you take from the increased wages that you have to pay over here. So it's economics. The capitalist economies kind of have a mind of their own. They operate on a principle of supply and demand and on, like I said, minimizing costs. So that's what the companies did for one color, green. And by 1980, almost all those industrial jobs were gone. Okay, so everybody in the neighborhood, they hadn't been rich before, but now they were like super poor. Okay, so the Chicago Housing Authority kind of stopped fixing these places up. They stopped maintaining them, and they started to go downhill as far as, appearance and maintenance. And Riverdale, was all the way at the edge of the city. It was not in anybody's way. And so it became neglected. Okay. It was surrounded by like vacant land, and it just turned into like a really impoverished like place to live. So the gangs at this point were able to completely take this stuff over. Okay. So at this point, it wasn't BGDs anymore. It was just GDs, then BDs, then Stones and Vice Lords. So, some of the biggest black gangs in the city, especially BDs, GDs. Well, the GDs are like probably the biggest black gang in the city and have been for a while. And then the Stones probably the second biggest. Vice Lords, when you include all their factions, might be on the same level as the Stones, but Vice Lords are split up into a lot of different factions, though. At that time, I think over there, though, it was just Vice Lords. It wasn't any specific kind. But anyways, they basically had a monopoly over these projects. And it really started to turn the projects up. On top of the gang problem, the residents over there also had to deal with just the nastiness of living in that area, which was heavily polluted. Like I said, it was way out of the way of everybody else, not anywhere near downtown or any other business district. The factories closed down, and there were chemicals coming from the factories that started to pollute the community. So the soil around the area from these factories were contaminated with DDT, DDE, DDD, PCB, and like all these other nasty chemicals that cause cancer. So the projects had lead in them. They had asbestos, and this was poisoning people. Okay, and these buildings were, made with these materials that they were making a lot of buildings with back in the day, that full of hazardous materials. People were suffering all kinds of health problems. So the residents were getting cancer left and right. So by the 80s, this was becoming a real problem. And there's an incident which is worth mentioning because an activist who at that time was, I believe, in his 20s, came there to help them in a protest against fiberglass and asbestos that was in the buildings, and trying to get this stuff removed. And that activist was a guy by the name of Barack Obama. So at this time, he was, in Chicago trying to get his thing going over here. But anyways, they kept on protesting and fighting against this. So that continues until this day, okay? Because, like I said, there's the factories that used to be there, and it's just a lot of health risks around there besides the gang problem that they had. In 1974, there was a big gas leak over there. And the air was completely contaminated, with this gas. One of the gang wars that's taking place over there is one that a lot of you guys may have already heard of. The BDs and the GDs, they're fighting in a lot of parts of the city, right? They've got a lot of neighborhood wars going on way to the north of this. But over here, there was a specific war between BDs and GDs, which you don't hear talked a lot about in the media. It's not like real famous because of rap, like the Brick Squad, Lamron, or the O Block STL. Those are probably the most famous ones. This was an incident that you guys may have remembered me reporting on at the time, which is a snapshot of this war between the BDs and the GDs over there, and I'll talk about the specific sets. So this was on a Wednesday night, okay, in a November when it was particularly cold out. This was a few years back. Prosecutors said that 7 men who were in a team, all part of this one street gang in Altgeld Gardens, were going through the neighborhood streets in what police said symbolized a synchronized military exercise. A guy named Devante and 6 other people connected to the GDs, the faction over there is called Bar None. They were armed. They were going through the apartment building courtyards and the basketball courts in coordinated 2-man teams, they said, tracing one another's movements and communicating through hand signals as they moved east toward rival territory in Block 9 of the 1000 block of East 132nd Street. So these dudes were like doing like this military style exercise, these Bar None GDs, looking for ops. But instead of finding members, they said, of the rival faction, and by the way, the rival faction that they were looking for was, as you guys know, BDs, but the faction was called Duffel Bag. Another name they go by is Take Some. So Bar None GDs versus Duffel Bag Take Some BDs in this area, and they were looking for these guys. They're on the east side of this territory, okay? They ran instead into a 53-year-old grandma, and she has 11 grandkids, or she had 11 grandkids. Her car was pulling into a parking spot just as the gunmen arrived on the block. Now, I told you guys, being in cars, if they can't see who's inside the car in Chicago, is very dangerous. A lot of innocent people die this way. So that's when Devante and 5 other unidentified men opened fire on the car. It was a Mitsubishi Galant. The grandma inside, her name was Kimberly. They killed her. Okay, one gunman had an AK-47 style rifle, and he couldn't get his weapon to fire. The other guys, though, were able to get shots off and killed her. And Devante, he's 27 years old. He's from Morgan Park, and he was the first one of the 7 that was arrested. He was facing first-degree murder charges, and this took place on November 6th of 2019, according to authorities. So, at his hearing, prosecutors were describing how Devante and 6 other men met up at Block 5 the night of the shooting, about 2 hours after several people from the rival territory were seen coming onto Bar None territory. Devante's group met up around 10:12 p.m. over by 132nd Street and St. Lawrence Avenue. They were on foot, okay, and they began moving in that coordinated block-by-block sweep for rivals going to Block 9. Okay, they took up positions, they said, and I'm saying this in quotes here according to the government. They aimed their weapons at various locations and signaled to each other with hand gestures. That's according to the assistant state's attorney. As they arrived near the grandma's home, the group members continued to see no movement until her Galant arrived. One member of the group approached the car in the lot and opened fire while standing about 5 feet away. So I don't know if she had tints, guys. I told you guys, if you're an innocent neutron, having tints is a bad idea. I don't know if she had tints or not. It's the only, I mean, it was nighttime. I don't know if they could see inside, but she had hair. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's not too many guys walking around with that hairstyle. There's not too many guys that are rocking that. Like, guys have dreads, okay. Some guys have short hair, but, I mean, I don't know how you could mistake her for a guy. So maybe she had tints. I don't know. But having tints is a bad idea in Chicago, man. So Devante and several others began shooting. Surveillance video captured the men leaving the scene. So her family remembered her as a hardworking woman, and she was only 2 weeks away from her 54th birthday. And, you know, in the court, the government was saying this sounds like something that was out of a movie. And he said they were literally stalking people. So the judge approved a request for a mandatory no bail ruling based on a pile of evidence the prosecution claimed, including an extensive neighborhood surveillance system that captured the faces, clothing, and vehicles of several offenders, and a color-coded mapping software that tracked the movements of each of the 7 gunmen. Each gunman was given their own corresponding color and video of their actions before, during, and after the shooting. Phone records also captured Devante using his phone at the same time and location that he was recorded, making a call. Anyways, he was in that surveillance video. Devante was also an aspiring rapper, and he could be seen in a social media video wearing the same hooded sweatshirt that he wore to the shooting. You know, so that's the kind of thing that you get in the Altgeld Gardens community, man. It's a very dangerous area. Barn on GDs and duffel bag BDs. That's one of the wars down there. And, the residents down there now, with the economy changing, a lot of them do have jobs now, but those industrial jobs really is the main issue. And that stuff is not coming back. It's not coming back. The economy has changed, and this is a whole another long topic for another video that I could go into about how now it's an economy that requires a specialized technical skill in most cases. And these are skills that need to be obtained in school. I mean, that's a critical moment. It's a critical opportunity and moment in one's life to obtain that credential that one is going to need in the economy. A lot of the women go into healthcare where there's plenty of jobs. And they know that, they're going to have to be prepared to support a kid on their own. They become nurses and stuff, and they get jobs in that because there's plenty of jobs in that. But the guys, a lot of them are not on that. But some of them are, and some of them are making their way out. And, some guys from the hundreds are doing their own thing. A lot of self-made guys down there. Zach TV was one of them. Rest in peace to him, man. So, anyways, that's a short history of the Altgeld Gardens projects. Any of you guys are from Altgeld Gardens, you guys let me know your own experiences, any feedback you guys want to give in the comment section, man. Rest in peace to the grandma and all the other innocent victims. Today, as far as ranking Altgeld Gardens versus the other projects, and you guys, like I said, that any of you guys that live in the projects can let me know your opinions in the comment section, but I personally think it's one of the worst. I would try and get, if you are in public housing or you're in low-income housing, I would try to apply for a place closer to the near north side where a lot of the new developments are going up around Lathrop, around some of the other areas that used to be really bad, okay, but are being redeveloped on the north side. It's probably about the same price. I admit I haven't checked the prices in Altgeld Gardens, but or any of the prices in the surrounding community, but a lot of the places I know, somebody who pays like $200 a month, okay, on the north side over here, that's something a lot of people can, most people I think can afford that. Because I know homeless guys that literally make more than that a month panhandling. So that's, something I think is affordable even for most low-income people. So I highly recommend putting in that application early while there's still units available. Okay, because there's a lot of these units available, like scattered throughout the north side, even some of the stuff at the North Pole area. And the North Pole has gang violence, I admit. But I wouldn't compare it with Altgeld Gardens. I think that's one of the worst projects in the city right now. So it's competitive though with those housing applications, but I would try and get something if you can. Near north side is the best place because this is an area that's really on the up and up, and there's a lot of service sector jobs that don't require an education within the immediate vicinity of these north side projects now too. So that's just my personal advice, man. You guys let me know, and you guys that have experience with this in the comment section, any feedback you guys want to give. Thanks for watching, guys. Your boy Chicago News. I'm out.